Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to CLAS MixTape. I'm Ryan Crew. I'm an associate professor of history and the chair of the history department here at CU Denver. And this is the second installment of CLAS MixTape. It's Out of the Echo Chamber, how the liberal arts and sciences can help revitalize democracy. Now, CLAS MixTape is a compilation of CLAS's greatest hits. And the idea here is to highlight, to showcase some of the great creative work that our faculty, staff, and students are doing to address some of the major issues of our time. And, you know, in our inaugural episode last month, we had a dynamic range of talks talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all that now is up on YouTube. So if you haven't seen it, go on there and check it out. And we'll have other talks coming up about the environment, and about disinformation, and other topics coming forward. But today we're going to look at democracy specifically, and how the liberal arts and sciences are essential to generating and regenerating democracy. Yeah? And I think, as we all can see in the news over the past many years, democracy has been in retreat. We've been seeing autocratic regimes around the world advance. We've seen autocratic methods of building power actually hijacking democratic processes, elections, formal democracy, right, in the name of autocratic ends. But at the same time, over the past decade or so, we've seen a massive kind of social, cultural reckoning as well about the distribution of power and who is included. And those conversations are essential, of course, to revitalizing democracy, to strengthening democracy, to recognize patterns of inclusion and privilege, but also exclusion, right, over the past centuries. And so today we're going to be inviting you to think about democracy not in terms of a system or elections, the usual things we run to, right? When we think about capital D democracy, kind of at the systemic level. But in order to have a conversation that can restart democracy, right, in the face of these challenges, but also with these opportunities, we're going to be looking at how communities generate democracy, how we in our own connections with each other generate democracy, democracy with a lowercase d, right? And so in order to revitalize and extend democracy, then, our talks today are going to be looking at how democracy is actually in action, right? In our workplaces, across our disciplines, in our classrooms, right? Democracy, most of the time as we live it, is a verb, not a noun, right? Not an abstract concept, but actually a practice, right? A set of verbs. It's a practice of listening, engaging, debating, acknowledging, recognizing, and including, resisting, and of course, voting, yeah? And so that's exactly what we're here for today, yeah? And in CLAS, we have a tremendous faculty and students and staff that are looking at problems just like this creatively, right? Across disciplines. And we are thinking about democracy not as something that is, but something that we do, right? In the humanities and social sciences, which we could think is kind of a natural home for thinking about democracy, of course, we have fantastic faculty across disciplines that are looking at democracy in various social contexts, across cultures, across time, right? In its various forms. We think about institutions, who is being included, who's being excluded, right, from decision-making processes. We also find democracy in the surprising places, right? Even deep within authoritarian regimes or oppressive societies, we find groups working through mutual aid, collaborating with each other, making collective decision-making. If we go to the past, to prehistory, we find societies all over the place now. evidence of societies that have worked together, right, to prevent the strongest or the wealthiest or the loudest in the room from calling all the shots, right? And so the other lesson from all of this is that democracy is incredibly fragile. It has to be renovated and reworked all the time. Our talks are going to be focusing on that as well. And in the 21st century, the fragility of democracy is such that we are, and the challenges are such that we're going to have to be calling on the sciences, right, to help guide us, because so much of what we are facing now, the 21st century, requires not just scientific research, but the dissemination of scientific knowledge, right? The pandemic, we don't want to all remember that. It's bad memory, right? But the pandemic was kind of a sign, right, of the challenges that our societies and political systems face in incorporating scientific knowledge in democratic decision-making. And we're certainly going to need a lot of that as we face climate change, continue to face it, right? And very rapid social technological advances taking place as a result of AI, for example. What's that going to do to democracy? The great thing about CLAS is that we are thinking holistically, right? So we have scientists, we have humanists, we have social scientists thinking outside of their own corners, right? And thinking about these problems holistically, how science, the humanities, and the social sciences interact with each other about a problem like democracy, yeah? And so today, our speakers will be giving us profound lessons, right, in democracy in practice, reminders that it starts with listening and with engaging. And so we'll be having some fantastic presentations across multiple disciplines in which we'll see learning and research at the service of democracy, expanding democracy. So we'll hear about how housing inequality is an essential thing to address if we are truly going to have a democracy. How a legacy of exclusion in the history of the US empire actually influences very much debates about citizenship and belonging today, right? How public monuments and how communities build memory together, right? Also is a democracy building exercise. And because we truly can't really have democracy unless we address issues of inequalities and exclusion right here, yeah, in our own circles. We have a series of videos also that we'll be presenting that will demonstrate or show you some histories of exclusion as they have unfolded and continue to unfold on our campus. Yeah. And to make sense of it all, we will end with poetry, yeah, to kind of have a place to help center our thoughts, yeah. But to start with, we will start with the prison system. Now, we might not think of the prison system as a place where we would start a talk about democracy, but Stephen Hartnett, professor of communication, is here precisely to demonstrate otherwise. Because if we are truly going to have a democracy, of course, it has to be for absolutely everyone. So Stephen is here to tell us all about the work he has been doing in the prison system in Colorado with his colleagues to bring higher education to imprisoned people in Colorado and to give them a second chance. So Stephen, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Bryan, thank you for that introduction. Thank you, Lisa, for putting this together. Thank you to CLAS leadership for hosting us. I'm here to talk about the CU College and Prison program. And before I go any farther, don't be shy. Just shout out, what do you see? Tell me in the image, what do you see in there? Go ahead, you say it loud. Prison? All right, we got a guy in prison. But talk to me about the medium. What do you see? It's a soap bar. Marty got it. It's a bar of soap. Arthur is a colleague. He participates in a program like ours in upstate Michigan, solitary confinement, no arts program. And like all of you, he has a desperate human need to express himself, to participate in our democracy by voicing his opinions. So, bar of Dove soap. The black and the browns are made from shoe polish. The other colors are made from breaking open flare tip pens. I show you this image to say, this is exactly why we have college in prisons, because every man, woman, and child in a prison in America has a desperate human desire to express themselves and to participate in their democracy. They are there because they have been systematically suffering from racism, trauma, institutionalized misogyny, lack of jobs, poverty, neighborhoods with the worst schools. If you want to revitalize democracy, you begin in the neighborhoods with the most harm. That means going to prison. That's why we have a program in prisons, because we're revitalizing democracy from the bottom up, from the grassroots. And what Arthur shows you is even men and women that you've been taught to call violent offenders, criminals. No, no, no. They're artists so desperate to communicate that they'll make art out of a bar of soap. All right, so here's the big picture. Prisons perpetuate injustice. They waste human potential. They weaken our democracy. What we all do as students, as faculty, as staff, we enable justice. We produce healthy citizens. We enhance democracy. So what a mind game this is to say, let's take all the positive things of education and let's inject them into the prison system. So what we are doing as a campus is we are trying to revitalize democracy by transforming the prison system. We're also trying to revitalize our campus. What this means is that we're having arguments about tuition, credit, registration, admission, student services. So when we say revitalizing democracy, that means going into prisons to bring justice there, but it also means bringing justice to our own campus and fighting with our own administration. And we want all of those imprisoned students eventually to come to our campus, to be your classmates, to be our students, so that we can learn from them, with them, alongside them. And here's an example. Here's the 3 lead actors in a recent performance of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, staged by the Wisconsin Shakespeare Project out of Racine Correctional Institution. What we do is we bring in college classes for credits. At the Shakespeare Project, they spend 3 months studying Shakespeare, and then they spend 3 months staging Shakespeare in the facility. So here you've got the 3 lead actors in the recent performance of Julius Caesar. And I show that with you by way of saying that what we're doing here in Denver is not unique. We are part of a national coalition of programs doing the arts, doing poetry, doing education, doing theater. So what we're doing here is part of a national movement. Along with our educational program, we as an institution published this magazine, Captured Words, Free Thoughts. I'm very proud to say that we are on the verge of publishing our 20th anniversary issue. Thank you. We publish testimonials, letters, op-eds, you name it, we publish it. It has to reach a certain level of quality. But the idea is we want to enable our students, the people we work with, to become voices and participants in democracy. So here's one recent issue, and I've given you a quote. You can all read the quote. I wanted you to read that because it's from Susanna Bannon. I met Susanna when she was serving time in a prison in North Texas, where she took college classes with a community college. She got out, got a master's degree, decided, I'm kind of good at this. Maybe I should get a PhD. I'm proud to have served on her PhD committee, and former prisoner Susanna Bannon is now Dr. Bannon. And since she got her PhD, she has now become the executive director of the Alliance for Higher Education in Prisons, which is based right here in downtown Denver. Now, I show you that just by way of saying that when the system I'm talking about works, it means that we go into prisons, we work shoulder to shoulder, we learn with them, we learn from them, we empower them, we create spaces for them to find their own voices. Then they start publishing in our magazine. Maybe if they're lucky, then they start to go to Wayne's magazine. Then they become civic leaders. That's what we're trying to do, is revitalize democracy, create a pipeline of success. Here's one group of our students from the Sterling Correctional Facility. It's 2 hours northeast. So all of our teachers have been driving a long time. It's up near the Wyoming-Nebraska border. And here's the guys on the day that they received their certificate in strategic communication. What you've got down here is a comment from our FCQs. We do those in our classes in prisons too. And you can see how grateful the students are. And what's really cool about this picture, you can see the guys, you can see Laurel Dodds there from our CPE program. And up on the screen, you see that the prison this day let us jack up a live Zoom feed, and so all the guys could have their families. So there were children and grandchildren and mothers and fathers joining us in this joyous celebration. So I wanted you to see the fellas and know that that's the kind of work we're doing. And I want to end with a poem. Here's Chantry Lowen, one of our guys from the Sterling. You can read the poem for yourself. To speak of social justice means imagining an unknown future. To speak of social justice means balancing action and fact. Regardless of a number, I still have a name. I will not let my past dictate my present. I mean, this is fantastic, right? This is a declaration of agency. This is a guy who goes to class in a jumpsuit with a number, and he's saying, F the number. I have a name. I'm a citizen. I'm a participant in our democracy. This is what we're trying to do. This is what we're trying to build. Our work is ongoing. We're going to start offering classes as soon as we get Pell Grants next fall. If you would like to be a teacher, if you would like to be a volunteer, if you would like to be a mentor or a tutor, please let me know. We can use you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This is exactly the kind of reason why it's so awesome to be working here. Just there's so much incredible work going on across campus. We have also a bunch of thank yous here. All to set up this entire series takes an immense amount of collaboration and democracy. And so our first thank you goes to Lisa Caronan, professor, chair of communication, who's very much the inspiration, the creator of this series. So it's been an incredible thing to be working with you and with everyone in this project. So this is fantastic. And there are many others to thank. Michel Medal in the communication department. Ellie Lewis, who I don't believe is here today, but thanks to Ellie. Karen Fennell, thank you so much. The Office of OIT, always essential back there. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Laurel Harmon and Alibi August. Is Alibi here? No. And Cassidy Thacker. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And of course, the Mixtape Steering Committee, which is helping guide this entire process. And also our thanks go to Dean Jansma, who is always encouraging kind of cross-disciplinary conversations and collaborations in this college. And it takes leadership, of course, to create the environment for all of us to be sharing with each other. So many thanks to Dean Jansma as well. Yeah. Now, our next speaker is Esther Sullivan, professor of sociology, who will be talking to us today about how researching housing inequality is essential to the fight for democracy. And she'll be explaining to us as well about how her experience as a researcher shows how powerful it is, right, to be collaborating across disciplines, doing cross-disciplinary research, and then getting the word out and putting those ideas to action. So, Esther.
Thanks so much. I'll start with the story. This is Joel. He's a line cook at a very fancy restaurant, but he makes about $45,000 a year. Though, even on that salary, he was able to access affordable housing in a community where it's safe for his daughter to play right outside and break into owning his own home, all because of a very crucial but often overlooked source of housing in the United States, manufactured housing, also called mobile homes and also called trailers. A large portion of my research on housing over the last 14 years has focused on manufactured housing as one of our most important sources of affordable housing in this country. 18 million people are living in a manufactured home in the United States. And this form of housing is really uniquely affordable because it's built in a factory. So it costs per square foot less than half to build as a site-built home. It's also one of our primary routes to low-income home ownership. So 70% of homes sold under $125,000 are manufactured homes. But manufactured homes are also a form of housing that's really plagued by inequalities. And that's in part because a large portion of these homes are placed in manufactured home communities where residents most often own the home, but they rent the lot where they place that home. And so they don't have legal right to the land under their home. So my research over the last 14 years and my book on the topic has covered housing insecurity, rent hikes, and ultimately mass evictions that take place in these communities because people lack legal right to the property under their homes. So sociologists conduct research in many different ways, but I use qualitative methods like interviewing and ethnography. Ethnography is a method of collecting data and recording processes like via field notes or audio recordings from inside a community over a period of time in a way that really centers the lived experiences and the voices of people that are encountering a given phenomenon. As an ethnographer, I drew upon 2 consecutive years of living inside closing manufactured home communities, being evicted alongside residents and following them into new forms of housing to conduct research on these types of housing insecurities that they encounter. So here's a picture of me conducting fieldwork before an eviction took place in this community, and here's a picture during an eviction. So I could talk all day about this research, but I'll ask a question. If millions of people are living in these homes, and if they cost less than half the cost to build as other forms of housing, and if they're one of our major routes to home ownership, and if they face these kind of egregious inequalities, why don't we hear more about them? Well, my research has also documented how this isn't just like a simple oversight. Historically, this has been codified in decades of laws and policies and regulations that have marginalized manufactured housing so that it's segregated from single-family housing and it's located disproportionately in non-residential, substandard, and oftentimes hazardous areas. And this really impacts the housing security of people living in these homes. So, for example, here's a picture of the 2013 Colorado floods, where we studied post-flood housing outcomes in the towns of Edwards, Lyons, and Milliken, kind of outside Boulder. These towns lost almost their entire affordable housing stock. And that's because up to 99% of manufactured housing in these jurisdictions was severely damaged or destroyed. Why was it severely damaged or destroyed? Is that because something about the structure of manufactured housing? No, it's because a large majority of manufactured housing in these jurisdictions was placed in floodplains where we wouldn't allow any other forms of housing to be placed. And then on top of that, when city councils in these towns enacted their post-disaster recovery plans, the voices of manufactured home community residents who are largely low income, who were working and couldn't attend city council meetings, who many of whom spoke a language other than English at home, those voices went largely unheard. So that's the piece that I want to talk with you about now, how research on inequalities can be put in service of actions that strengthen the rights of marginalized communities. For manufactured housing community residents across the country, they are fighting for their rights to their communities. And here, data, maps, stories, archives can all be put in service of these people. And I don't mean that in like a top-down way that kind of shows people how they're reflected in data, but rather in a way that really supports, and I like to think of it as accompanies people in their struggles on the ground to show how these struggles aren't singular, but are systemic. So as researchers, we can put our data in the service of people that are fighting for a cause, and we can do that simply by showing up. So in Aurora, when residents of Denver Meadows Mobile Home Park showed up at city council meetings over a year and fought against the closure of their park, I showed up too, and I provided data showing how when jurisdictions lose manufactured home communities, they lose a large portion of their affordable housing stock, and that housing cannot be met at similar levels of affordability that exist within cities. Or in 2019, in the state legislature, when residents fought for House Bill 1309, which provides protections against rent hikes and evictions, or when they fought for House Bill 1196, which this is my 1196, when they fought to create a statewide dispute resolution system where they would have a place to make their voice heard against predatory landlord practices. Or finally, in 2020, when they fought for legislation to strengthen their ability to purchase their communities so that they could own that property collectively. In all those cases, I accompanied residents with data showing how pervasive predatory landlord practices are, what are the documented outcomes for residents, and what are the positive outcomes that we see in communities when they've transitioned to resident ownership. So, we can put our research in service of democracy by showing up, but we can also do this in how we collect data. So I kind of started by talking a little bit about the methods that I use, and if you'll allow me, I'll close a little bit by talking about methods. And you might ask, like, okay, what does methodology have to do with democracy? But I would say everything, because all methodologies are making claims about power and knowledge. So as I said, my work draws on the tools of the social sciences, ethnography and interviewing, and that really centers people's experiences. But it also draws on the tools of geography, where I use maps to document, for instance, where parks are located so we can track where they're closing over time. And it also relies on the tools of the humanities. Social scientists, qualitative social scientists especially, we collect people's experiences and stories so that we can make systematic claims and generalize, about social worlds. But that kind of work, it requires that we tune ourselves in to the texture of people's narratives. And that's where training in the humanities is so crucial. So I came to my PhD in sociology, not from a background in the social sciences, but as an undergraduate English major. And I know, yeah. And I know that training has really, it's just tuned me into a way of collecting and translating, people's experiences. So what does all that mean for democracy? I'll just say this. Every time I'm asked to testify at a city council hearing, and that's across the country, or every time I've stood in front of the state legislator in Colorado, I'm asked to provide data and to contextualize that data with people's stories. And there, the interdisciplinary tools of the liberal arts have given me the foundation to do that work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther. We transition now from contemporary struggles to reckoning with the past. We also won't get anywhere unless we confront, right, our histories and the power structures that are here among us that are deeply, deeply rooted. And so our next speaker, Jim Walsh, a professor in the political science department, will be speaking to us today about memory, public memory, how communities build memory around things like immigration, around labor, and how that can be incredibly powerful as well to building local democracy. So Jim, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, and thanks everyone. It's an honor to be here. And it's great to be here with so many friends I've known for so many years. It's like a reunion or something. I like to use theater, and I contemplated doing a monologue that I acted out 100 or 1,000 times as a 19th century Irish miner, but I only have 8 minutes. So if I did the monologue, I wouldn't be able to really talk to you, but this is an important story, so I have to tell you the story. As part of my dissertation research 20 some years ago, I found this pauper cemetery in the back of Leadville's main cemetery called Evergreen Cemetery. And a friend brought me there to the back of the cemetery where we found, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was just sunken holes, acres of sunken holes, over 7,000 of them. And I knew that the holes that I was looking at were the people I had been researching. So as an historian, this was a very intimate thing for me to see. And public history favors the privileged. I mean, we have mansions and the places where the privileged work, the places where the privileged live. That's public history. So the poor really just left us their bodies and the markings in the soil where they're laid to rest. So I wanted to make this a place of memory for working class people. I found some records, found that in the Catholic part of the cemetery is mostly Irish immigrants, really people from all over the world, but the majority were Irish immigrants, famine refugees mostly. The average age of the people buried here is 22. And half of them, fully half of the burials are under the age of 8. So almost no markers really, just acres of these sunken holes. They were buried in cheap pine boxes, which collapsed quickly. The city made their bodies available to the medical community for experiments without consent. We found that from an oral history taken with the guy who managed the cemetery. As long as they returned the remains to the grave, they could have at it. That was really the role of the time. So a friend said, you should reach out to the Irish government. So I did, reached out to the Irish government 7 years ago and told them about this space. I didn't think they'd care. It's a small town cemetery. Why would the Irish government care? They did. The diaspora is a very important part of Ireland and the Irish history. So they sent a consul general in 2016, and the idea of a memorial grew from there. 3 years later, the ambassador came. This is him in the red tie, and the consul general in the green tie. And then from there, money started rolling in from the Irish government. Immediately, we knew, at least it was clear to me, that this wasn't just an Irish story. All the names would be on this memorial, not just we weren't just going to take the Irish names, all the names. That was very clear. And for me, there were, so it all started 7 years ago. The idea to memorialize the people buried there, to put the bottom on top for just an instant. If you visit Leadville and see this memorial, the bottom are on top. It kind of turns the world upside down for a radical moment that's beautiful to see. And I have so much to say in 8 minutes. I'm nervous about it. I say that. So it's done. The memorial was unveiled 3 weeks ago. It's beautiful memorial. It's immediately the biggest thing that mattered to me was all the names had to be on there, and they are. They're on the memorial. We've discovered that this isn't just an Irish space. It's a multiracial space. People of color were buried in this pauper cemetery regularly, some with in the children's sections, adults in the children's section. The most haunting reference in the records to me is a person who's not only unnamed in the cemetery, they're also unnamed in the record. It simply says unknown Mexican killed on railroad. And so for me, there were 3 really big moments, important bridges to build here. First of all, the Southern Ute Nation to ask permission. And so to build this memorial. And so we developed a relationship with the Southern Ute Nation. This is the cultural director, Cassandra Atencio, being gifted a photograph from a Belfast photographer of American Indian movement leaders in Belfast working with the IRA in the 80s. And she's being gifted this photograph. The second big ask that I made of all the people involved is to make sure that the Leadville's immigrant community is a part of this process. 40% of Leadville today are immigrants. Many live in the kinds of homes we just saw in the presentation. And thirdly, the labor community had to be involved. That to me was absolute must. so much has come out of this. One is Leadville's now twinned with this village in Ireland where many of these immigrants came from. And this is the Irish ambassador today, the second Irish ambassador who's been to Leadville. This was at the unveiling that we just had. You can see the statue of the miner on a knee. I wanted a statue of a child because half of them are children. About 40% are babies and stillborn. So it's a haunting place to go to see at Ludlow. If you've been to the Ludlow Memorial, those workers were killed with bullets and kerosene. These workers were killed by poverty, epidemics, lack of health care, all the disparities that we talk about, today. These are my students, UCD students, who put together a beautiful exhibit up at Leadville that's on display right now. And and this is what the memorial looks like. It's Celtic spiral walkways. It's like a labyrinth to the top, where there's a miner and a huge boulder they took from the Climax mine. They put it in the wrong place, but then they couldn't move it. So I guess that's how the Irish are. And then and then the names are illuminated at night. It's a beautiful space. And at night, there's people who gather there. People are leaving things there. There's coins, there's rocks, there's mementos, there's artifacts. It's like the people are claiming the memorial. And I want to end with a story about democracy. The public history changes meaning as the years go by. To me, it's vital that this memorial has just the same power a century from now as it has today. And so those bridges that I mentioned were a big part of that. But another part of that is the ceremony that we had to unveil the memorial. And the organization that planned that ceremony didn't want to allow a speaker from the immigrant community or the labor community to be represented. So that was a huge source of conflict. And I was not going to let 20 years of hard work just back off of that. So I continued to make that demand. Things escalated. It went all the way to the day of the unveiling. And when I was introduced to speak, I simply brought those speakers up with me and introduced them myself. I would rather have no memorial than a compromised memorial, and I feel like that would have compromised this memorial. So I feel like the memorial continues to inhabit the spirit it's intended to inhabit. We had over 500 people at the unveiling, and it's great to know that the Irish government cares about the diaspora, and also that this isn't just an Irish story. This is really a story of migrant communities everywhere. This is a story of workers everywhere. And the amount of notoriety it's received in the international press has been quite heartwarming as well. That I'll end maybe. How much time do I have? Okay. I've never done an 8-minute speech, so this has come to represent to me a memorial to immigrant rights, a memorial to workers' rights, and we thought we were just memorializing these 1,300 people, but it's become so much more than that. And what I believe it's tapped into is, in fact, at the unveiling, what I did is I read names of people who have died in the Arizona desert. I read names of people who drowned in the Mediterranean Sea, because I feel like those names, this memorial has to be about those names too. And so for me, this is about, in Ireland, you can't meet a family that doesn't have a lost ancestor, someone who drifted off to North America and were lost and were never heard from again. These names have come to represent all those people. And to Irish Americans, the memorial, I believe, represents, has come to represent the human toll of industrial labor. The numbers of people who were lost building railroads, digging canals, working, cleaning homes, and honoring the people today that do that backbreaking work is, I believe, what this memorial represents. And so I'm so honored to be here and to share this with all of you. And the next time you're in Leadville, you got to see this, friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for standing up for the memory of immigrants both now and then. Yeah, and for drawing that line from the coffin ships and the Great Hunger and Gore to More, right, to the various expanding crises that we see today, right? Yeah. Following in that line, seeing the past and the present, lessons and echoes, and also the failure of democracy, right? And the limits of democratic claims that the US government has made for so long. We now turn to the history of the US empire over the last 125 or so years. And we have Faye Caronan, professor of ethnic studies and associate dean for faculty affairs, who will be leading us through the history of exclusion and how that affects debates about citizenship right up to this day. So Faye.
Hello, everyone. I hope that this will make sense because I, am within 8 minutes. So, we often think of democracy, of course, as defined by citizenship, right? If you are a citizen, you have the full rights afforded to you by the nation that you live in. But today, I'm going to be telling you some stories of US territorial citizens, which I define as residents on US territories who don't have the same rights as US citizens who live in the 50 states. For the sake of time, I'm only going to be talking about the Philippines today. Between 1898 and 1946, the Philippines was first a US territory and then became a US Commonwealth after 1934. During this time, Filipinos living on this US possession were something called a Philippine citizen. They were not US citizens, but they were, until 1934, US nationals. They did not have the right to vote for, say, their governor general, but they did have the right to travel anywhere within the US empire until they lost their US national status. This is a Philippine citizen US national passport. The writing's all, very calligraphy, but one of the things that it says on the passport is that whoever is presented the passport is to permit this citizen of the Philippine Islands owing allegiance to the United States to safely and freely pass, and in case of need, give him all lawful aid. All right, but I'm going to back up a little bit to kind of talk about how did the Philippines become a US territory. So this is the US empire circa 1898. Like I said, I'm only going to be talking about the Philippines, but you could see there's Puerto Rico, the Ladrones Islands, which is today Guam. The Philippines was attained by the United States after the Spanish-American War, and then the US quashed the subsequent Philippine battle for independence, which we know as the Philippine-American War. Prior to the acquisition of these overseas territories, contiguous territories here, in the mainland were given, the white residents of those territories were given citizenship as soon as those, even before those territories became states. So there was a debate when the US obtained overseas empire. Are these folks on these islands going to be given citizenship? Filipinos certainly thought that the Constitution should follow the flag. You had delegations of Filipinos going in front of US Congress year after year petitioning for citizenship. But ultimately, records show that Filipinos were not considered as being candidates for US citizenship. This mainly had to do with the fact that they were racialized as too primitive to be able to assimilate into what we consider to be, or what they consider to be American. In 1916, they were denied full citizenship, and it was said, well, this territory is just sovereign enough that they do not have to be citizens of the United States. In a series of insular cases, the Supreme Court also ruled that the US Constitution authorizes Congress to treat territories different from states. And that is why even today, US territorial citizens do not have the same rights as citizens here in the States. And I wanted to point out that this is a popular kind of travel log from the early 1900s. And I think it's really telling because it's called Our Islands and Their People. And the fact that those people were never considered our people. It's just the islands that were important to the United States. So I'm now going to go through two examples of why US territorial citizenship is precarious. One of these is, as I've already said, the Philippines was first a territory and became a US Commonwealth. Because it turns out that though they didn't have full rights, the right to travel anywhere within the US empire was a very coveted right, especially for folks coming from the Philippines, because the early 1900s was the era where Asians were excluded from immigrating. However, Filipinos had this loophole. Since they were US nationals, they were able to enter the United States, and Hawaiian plantations, Alaskan canneries, West Coast farms all capitalized on this by recruiting Filipino laborers, since they were no longer able to recruit Chinese laborers, Japanese laborers, Korean laborers, laborers from South Asia. By 1934, anti-Asian sentiment on the West Coast, among other motivations, led to the passage of what is called the 1934 Tidings-McDuffie Act, also known as the Philippines Independence Act. But don't let that name fool you. The Philippines did not become independent. They became a commonwealth. They did not become independent until 1946. But what the Tidings-McDuffie Act did was rescind national status from Philippine citizens. It said, well, now that you're a commonwealth, you are independent, sovereign enough that you are no longer US nationals. I will say that today, Puerto Rico is a commonwealth. Those folks are citizens. So this is not something that is consistent. On May 1st, 1934, when the Tidings-McDuffie Act went into effect, 73 men were en route from the Philippines to San Francisco. When they arrived in San Francisco, they found that their status had changed en route. They had those little passports that I had shown you, and they said, nope, you guys are now aliens ineligible for citizenship. You're coming from Asia, and so you are not allowed into the United States. The INS ordered all of these men to be deported because they were excluded according to immigration laws. Only a handful of these men successfully challenged their deportation. As Ryan points out, the important thing is that you have this kind of constant resistance, right, by folks who are asserting the rights that they believe that they should have. And I wanted to point out that the ways in which that the folks who were able to successfully challenge their deportation decisions had to do with the fact that they were able to secure legal representation by their employers gave them legal representation, but also that their employers testified on their behalf of I only found 4 who were allowed to enter, and all of their employers testified on their behalf saying that their work was indispensable. Most of these folks were houseboys, so their employers in the household said, I absolutely cannot run my household without these people. Please do not deport them. And so on the right, Mariano Ngala was one of those folks who was let in. But this argument of being a good worker did not always work. Jose Silag, he was working for a family who was in the Philippines. They were going to move back to the United States, and he was traveling with that family in 1934. And of course, when he arrived, he was ordered to be deported. Those employers said, well, we spent all this money to pay for his travel, to bring him along with us. He really is indispensable to our household. And they, the courts still found that, well, he hasn't lived here before, you'll find someone else. And they chose to deport him. So that argument of I'm worthy to stay here because I'm a good worker does not always work. The second example of precarity that I want to point to is the Filipinos who served in the military during World War II. So during World War II, the Philippines was still a US Commonwealth, and the Philippine Commonwealth Army, of course, reported up to the US Army forces in the Far East. Filipino soldiers fought bravely alongside their American counterparts. They encountered brutal treatment as prisoners of war. However, in 1946, when the Philippines was finally granted independence, Congress passed something called the Rescission Acts that removed benefits that had been promised to these Filipino vets from these World War II veterans. Among the reasons given for their decision was just that it would be too costly. It would cost $2 million a year to recognize and compensate their military service. So they rescinded those benefits. This was something that Filipino vets actually continue to fight for. A lot of them eventually migrated to the United States, and those that became citizens through the naturalization process petitioned Congress asking for their benefits to be reinstated. And I just wanted to point to their erasure in popular culture, like right around after World War II, their contributions were recognized through films like Back to Bataan. But here, there is also a novel written during the Cold War era called Starship Troopers. And in Starship Troopers, the main character is Juan Rico, who is a Filipino, right, fighting for the Terran Federation. But in the 1990s, which was kind of the height of Filipino vets asking for their rights, Starship Troopers was made into a popular film. Juan Rico became Johnny Rico. So it just, for me, was really telling how, their benefits were taken away, and then, their kind of participation was erased entirely in a time where if they were really represented, that would have made a difference to the Filipino vets who are actually asking for their benefits to be reinstated. So today, there are still US territorial citizens. Folks in Guam and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands are US citizens. However, they have limited rights. They can't vote for the president. They can only vote for their, local representatives, and they only have non-voting representatives in Congress, representatives who don't vote. Folks in America Samoa are actually still, they still have US national status, the same status that Filipinos had in the beginning of in the first half of the 1900s. And then I wanted to bring up that the Federated States of Micronesia, Republic of Palau, Republic of Marshall Islands, all have this compact of free association with the United States, which allows them to travel anywhere within the US empire. So it has kind of similar benefits, and those folks today have a similar precarious status when they get to the United States as Filipinos did way back when. And I want to end with lessons for dreamers. This was something I was thinking about when Adelina gave her presentation at the last mixtape. And the two examples that I talked about today, the Filipino laborers whose status changed while traveling and Filipino World War II vets, they both argued for their worthiness for their rights based on their exceptional labor or their military service. And the arguments were usually not successful, but that was the argument they made. And I think that the important lesson here for dreamers is that they are, they actually use the same kind of logic. We deserve to be here because we're really good students. We deserve to be here because we too pay taxes. But to me, making these types of arguments about who is worthy of status and who isn't implies that there are people who aren't worthy. And my question is, do all citizens have to prove their worthiness? And that's no. So it makes me wonder why we require some folks who should belong to make this argument that they are worthy. And so what I want you all to take away from what I've said today is that I think that for us to enact the full promise of democracy, we really require this decolonial lens that understands things about, things such as who has only been differentially included and what can that teach us in order to create inclusion for all. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Faye. We now turn from, reckoning with historical legacies to going straight to our campus and seeing how legacies and processes and practices of exclusion continue to affect people right here, right among us on this campus. Professor Marty Otañez of anthropology and chair of anthropology, and Bryan, professor of geography, have been leading an effort to create videos, to do kind of a kind of video ethnography on this campus with BIPOC students to allow for expression of experiences of exclusion as they have lived them on this campus. And so we have 3 videos today, and I'd like to invite Marty and Bryan to present this. And here we are. Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you. Good to see everyone. This is gonna be a 2-parter. It's gonna be me, the videos, and then Bryan. So I thought I'd start by a labor acknowledgement. I want to just acknowledge the people who prepare our classrooms, the service workers that prepare the food, the snacks, the students, undergrad, grad students who lead labs and grade papers, also faculty members who grade, do lectures, and people like me, chairs who review portfolios for promotion and tenure, and especially those who are members of United Campus Workers, a union here on UC Denver. So I just want to start with that. So it's really exciting for me. None of this work I do happens alone. I have so many collaborators. Bryan, Jody Beck in College of Architecture. He's also one of the collaborators in a project. And also dozens of students who are video editors that provide service or help facilitate workshops. And also the stuff I do, typically, I try to avoid working for free when I can. So there's been funding, so I just want to acknowledge the funders for a couple of these projects. The first one is the CU Office of Research Services, specifically the Creative Research Collaborative Program, who funded the video called Wonderland, which is going to be Esme's video, which was actually produced not in the BIPOC project, but in a project focusing on youth leadership development in the Denver metro area. And so the digital storytelling process was a methodology. Also funding from CU Denver's DEI office, and then also the Class Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So digital storytelling is kind of confusing. So it's 2 things. It's a process and it's a product. The most important thing is that the idea is the product is not necessarily the goal. The process of story sharing, whether in a workshop format or in a classroom, it's building solidarity among people. Maybe it's temporary solidarity, but it's really developing kind of a universe of storytellers where people feel comfortable, especially sharing those stories that maybe have never been told publicly. Those kinds of stories tend to be the best because the emotional heartstrings that they pull tend to be that much more amplified. And then typically a metric, when you show these videos, people come out of the woodwork and say, I want to share my story. So the digital story itself is a video, usually personal photographs, a voiceover from the individual, and also background music. And the idea is in the university, at least for me, it's better to learn to first tell your own story before telling other people's stories. And then, one thing to end, because I want to go into the videos, it's mostly about the storytellers, is this process, it's an excellent way for icebreakers in classes. It's also a way to really build genuine relationships of solidarity with community members because you're giving something back. Historically, anthropologists, others, we kind of milk people for data, but this is like a really genuine way to give stories that can maybe be put on a website or help with evaluations of reports and projects. And so it also involves the democratization of the classroom, specifically for me, bringing parity in terms of the written text and the visual text, in terms of what we're rewarded for in the university. And so finally, these are co-creations. It's typically not Marty editing people's videos. It's a collaborative effort between the storyteller and the facilitators. And then this also is an intervention in terms of research to ensure co-authorship of publications with storytellers to ensure that they're part of the process if they want to participate. So I hope you enjoy the videos. Then Bryan will come up and help decompress and debrief some of this stuff. So thank you.
And I got the videos in here in the wrong order, so I'm just going to move forward here very quickly. And students, I know you might have a 12:30 class. We'll end about 1 or 2 minutes after, so we'll get you out of here, I promise. But these are great stories, so stay with us. All right.
I don't know what the I-70 expansion is or my favorite. I don't have time. If I had $1 for every time a high school student from Swansea told me this, I would be a billionaire. It is unbelievable that many youth live so close to the highway, yet have no idea that this new idea of expanding the highway is promoting displacement. Gentrification sucks. I'm in the middle of it all. My house is on the list of 50 houses that CDOT plans to erase. I will be losing my home, neighborhood, friends, basically my life. Gentrification is higher income residents moving in with their cookie cutter homes and their fancy dogs to take advantage of cheap housing and lands. Gentrification means that Juanita's Panaderia and other mom and pop businesses that I have grown to love shut down or move away. Have you ever been to Swansea? You know the neighborhood next to Perina? I love everything about my Swansea. I love walking in my neighborhood, and almost everyone here greets me with a smile and a friendly hello. Walking into El Tepetate, I'm always greeted with a warm Buenas tardes. The business owner says, ¿Cómo está don y doña? When my parents walk in. You can't get this feeling of belonging at a chain grocery store the way you feel it at El Tepetate. At Swansea Elementary, kids play tag and roll down the hill during recess. It's fun to watch. Teams play what they think is the best basketball game they will ever play at Dunham Park. CDOT wants to change all of this by renovating I-70 and tearing down houses on the south and north side of the highway. Promises to fix my fear and pain of losing my beaten down home. CDOT's empty words promising a better house doesn't lessen my anxiety about being forced to move away and becoming a stranger in some other city. Swansea is becoming a nightmare. When my eyes close and my tired body goes down for the night, the fumes of diesel trucks passing over my head disrupt my sleep. Have you ever slept next to an elevated highway? Now imagine sleeping next to a lowered highway, which is what CDOT wants. This is why I'm a block captain, who informs the community on Fillmore Street from 40th to 46th Street about changes regarding Swansea. The end results are meetings with 50 or more people showing up. I won't stand on the sidelines while government officials and corporations thirsty for cheap land make decisions on how and where I should live my life. I'm involved. This is my community. And regardless of how busy life is, I always find time to meet with my neighbors, to remind them that these are our lives, families, and homes. Swansea, as it is, may not be the best to you, but to me, it's home.
Is Diddy saying? Diddy Santana in the house? No. All right. So in the interest of time, we are going to go to Bryan Wee's video.
I am ashamed of them. The red welts that show up beyond the edges of my school uniform. They come from the woman whose temper knows no bounds, who inflicts pain and instills fear because she loves her son. They come from the man next to her, who sees everything but does nothing. I know this is wrong, but you will thank me later, he says, and hands the woman a cane. I should know better than to make mistakes on a test. I should know that anything less than perfection is failure. The woman's cane slices through the thick, humid air, repeatedly, without restraint. I cry for mercy, but it does not come. Not that night, or any night after. Pain turns into despair, and eventually into rage. As I grew older, I learned that if I concealed my emotions, the woman and man would have no power over me. I withdrew into a place where there would be no need for tears. In choosing to leave Singapore, I told myself that I would be leaving all this behind. I was wrong. There are other kinds of punishment beyond the physical and psychological. Much like the woman and man who taught me that I was not enough, I have learned that I will never be enough in this country. I am neither white, nor black, nor brown enough. I am not female enough, not poor enough, not immigrant or foreigner enough. I am marginalized, just not marginalized enough. To survive, I learned to be different personalities but the same person. I am soft-spoken, but it does not mean I am soft. I am compassionate, but part of me is ready to fight. People argue about a wall to the south, but to me, it is already built in the spaces that we choose to fill with anger.
Thanks. All right, so Marty and I would like to wrap up our presentation by leaving you with this thought. Think of a story, right? Your story in the context of our session today on democracy. Think of one that you'd like to share, but also think of a story that you're perhaps hesitant or afraid to talk about. And the reason this is important is because storytelling, like democracy, is about risk-taking, right? And I think actually, now that we've reached close to the end of our session, I've realized that most of the presentations, if not all today, are about storytelling. And when we engage in these kinds of activities, what we do is we put ourselves out there. We open ourselves to scrutiny, to critique, and actually quite intentionally, we make ourselves vulnerable. And it's interesting because I have a couple of students from my class this semester who are in the audience. And so they have now seen or come to know a part of me that even my closest colleagues here at CU Denver haven't known about for the last 16 years that I've been here. And so I struggled, and Marty knows this, I struggled with whether to share this or not. And the questions in my mind were, how will I be perceived, right? What difference might this make? Not just my video, but all the stories that we share, all the effort that we go into putting them together. will they make any difference? But then I realized that much like democracy, just because we don't know the outcomes doesn't mean we don't take action. And I will very quickly share with you a quote from one of my favorite authors, Bell Hooks, Teaching to Transgress, and she writes about education as the practice of freedom. And I'm paraphrasing here, but she says, she writes, if we are afraid of making mistakes, if we are afraid of doing things wrongly, if we are constantly evaluating ourselves, we will never make the changes that we want to see. And so I can't vote. I'm not a US citizen, but it doesn't mean I cannot participate in democracy. And I think, especially after today, I think it is in spaces like this where we negotiate meanings, where we listen, but where we contest ideas and values. I think it is in these spaces that changes happen. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bryan, and thank you so much, Marty. So we have a lot to think about, right? We have reckoning, listening, acknowledging, yeah, and risking, yeah, storytelling as well. And we can see how we can start to build democracy through these connections and through sharing our stories and our experiences with each other. Now, we conclude with Wayne Miller, professor of English, who will be reading for us a poem titled We the Jury. Thank you.
I'm going to close this with this poem, which is the title poem from my book, We the Jury. And you have to imagine the voice in this poem as, you have to imagine the voice in this poem as being a jury, like a kind of collective voice of a jury that's been tasked with the job of evaluating itself. And so that jury is speaking. I think of that as a metaphor for the work we're doing here, for the job of humanism and of democracy. We, the jury, having heard the evidence against us, having taken into account the strength of every possible position, having gone home to our partners, our children, and having never mentioned the full details of our thoughts, having come to comprehend the wrongs of which we stand accused, having pledged to consider our omissions and our acts, we know that we will determine the facts, and those facts will become the surface upon which this world rests. We will assess the veracity of our witnessing against us. We understand our innocence could well require we find ourselves guilty. And when at last the verdict arrives, we will come down upon us with the weight of our entire existence. Even then, not one of us will truly understand what we have done. Thank you.
Thank you everyone so much for coming. And next month we have on November 9th, I believe it is, our next mixtape on environmental justice. So stay tuned. Thank you so much.